I first met Bill Hegner in the mid to late 1970s when he worked at the Institute of Teachers. And he was a field officer for remote teachers, essentially, or remote members of the Institute. First meeting of him, he had this twinkle in his eye. He was like, you just knew that he was up to some mischief. There was something that he was up to that was not quite kosher. And it turned out that Bill was the loveliest bloke you'd ever want to meet, welcoming, really good fella to be with. And people trusted him. What I didn't know at the time is that he'd also spent a bit of time in Vietnam. And this is where you come into the thing, because you were his officer commanding at some point, I believe in 71 or 2. And I wonder if you can talk back through, do you remember Bill and how did you meet him and all those sorts of things, a bit of background there.
Yes, Bill was one of those characters, as you rightly describe. He had a marvellous personality, very generous and very loyal, and powerful, very powerful in his advocacy and anything he took on. We were posted to 86 Transport Platoon in Vietnam in 1971 to 72. Bill arrived. I arrived in January 71, and I think Bill actually got there at the end of 1970. The unit was 86 Transport Platoon. There we have it, the 86 Southeast Asian Drinking Society, original T-shirt. Might tell you a little bit about what they did when they weren't doing their work. And the unit was one of 2 units that provided transport to the Australian force. And Bill was a driver. I was posted in as the second in command of the unit. So because of military protocols, the relationship was always a little different to that of his drinking buddies. But that being said, we got on famously. I think we identified each other as kindred spirits in a way, right from day one. And we were South Australians, and you always, in the military, you tend to, look for your mates from the home state, maybe same barrack for the same footy teams, or maybe even got at the same school. So I got to know Bill very, very quickly, and as best we could, we were friends, and I oversaw what he did for a number of months until he went home, I think, on January the 19th, 1972.
So what were the qualities you saw in him that made a connection for you?
Well, first of all, he was sociably a really good bloke. He got to know everybody really well, and he was an enormously strong advocate for them. He a very compassionate fellow, very loyal and compassionate would be the 2 things I saw in the military. And his loyalty was exhibited to everybody, as was his compassion. If his mates were in trouble, Bill would be at their side in 2 seconds flat. And if they needed someone to speak on their behalf, Bill would do that. And it was interesting because he was only young then. It was before he'd been a teacher, but before he'd done any of the marvellous things he came to do later in life. And a lot of those were based on those same characteristics. He, as an example of that, I came to know, I went away for a while. When I came back to the unit, Bill and I were talking. Bill came to me one day, this is near the end of the war, and he and a mate of his called Bill Jewell, so there were 3 Bills in the room. He came and said, we're going to write a book, Bill and I. And I said, oh, it's fantastic. And they had this plan. They'd come to me at morning tea time, the 2 of them, and wandered into the office. And they told me the name. I can't remember it now. And they said, would you write the foreword for it? And I said, yeah, I'd be privileged to do it. So we obviously got on well for him to do that. The book never ever came to fruition. I think he was too busy doing much other stuff. In those discussions, I found out that, I came to be aware that Bill, after hours of his own volition, during the week, he would go into town and teach young Vietnamese students English. He and another mate, they were both teachers, and they went to the local school there, and he taught them. These were young people that were aspiring to go to uni, and English would be a real advantage for them. So he did that for several days a week, I think, for quite some time, to the extent that when the war was finishing and our involvement in the war was concluding, bear in mind that we left in early 72, that the war with the communists being successful, didn't end until 3 years later. But towards the end there, I nominated Bill for a community and the other Bill, the teachers for a community service medal through the South Vietnamese government, which I'm sure they would have got, but unfortunately things were a bit chaotic, and with us leaving pretty quickly, that those medals were never awarded, unfortunately.
We seem to have had a surfeit of bills in Vietnam on our behalf, didn't we?
Yes.
Now, and all the time I knew Bill, Bill Hignett in this case, I never heard him raise his voice, but I was never, ever in any doubt about what he thought about. So he had this sort of knack of silence that would just convey his depth of passion about something, or his determination that something should be done.
Yeah, and his authority. You know, you're right about that. And he and I did a lot of double acts together in the sense of presentations, and we did a lot of that. We sort of got together. I lost track, if I could just go back, I lost track of Bill when I got back. I was in the army, so I was posted all around the world, and Bill came back and was posted to various postings around the state. So we lost track, but I remember in 1985, so it was about 13 years later, I was at the Army Staff College in Victoria, and I was driving back to Adelaide, and I went through Millicent late one night, and I stopped and grabbed the phone book. We had phone boxes then with phone books in them, and I looked up all the Hignetts thinking I could find a J.W. Hignett, and I found a lot of Hignetts, so many so that at 8 o'clock at night, I was never going to be able to ring them. But not long after that, when I came back to Adelaide full-time to live in 1990, I asked around, and I remember the first day I went into the RSL and said, you know, does anybody know Bill Hignett? They said, oh, yeah, we know Bill Hignett. He's in the hall downstairs. So I went down, and in January 1990, and we always hit it off, but we hit it off from that perspective. We hit it off, and we found that our passions were identical. They were mirror image. Both of us had the same view on just about every single thing. So it was a great synergy about when we took on a cause, and he was in various, he got me onto the Board of Reconciliation South Australia, I got him onto various boards. So we did that piggybacking stuff, and that led to when Bill had really smart lad and some really good ideas, far better than mine, but we would work as a double act, and sometimes I'd make the contacts and do the presentation, Bill would do the back work, or it could be reversed. But when he went into those presentations, the thing about Bill, his technical detail of his argument was always absolutely bulletproof, and I would quite often do some of the speaking, and between the two of us, we delivered more than it wasn't 100% each. It ended up being about 250% because we built on each other's strengths. You know, Bill was just great.
Bill was a very strong advocate for Aboriginal veterans.
He was, yeah.
Can you talk me through some of that?
Yeah, well, there's lots of stuff he did through his job as a union organiser, and before that as a field officer. I know he worked with Professor Peter Buckskin to get the first, I think, as I recollect, but others will tell you more accurately about Aboriginal field service officers or Aboriginal teachers, all that sort of thing. He did a lot of work in that area. But with me, we both had both as military breeds. It's quite interesting because you can get some really, as we've found out recently with the referendum and the stuff that was on Facebook, I see some military people whose views disappoint me, but sometimes it goes the other way. And the bedrock of the military is you sign your name, you're prepared to defend your country with your life. You might not necessarily agree, but there's a sense of fair play in there. And Australians particularly, Australian soldiers tend to be fairly aware of who the underdog is and looking after them. It's just not a paid job. They tend to get embedded with those people, as we did in New Guinea with the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels and everywhere else. That spins off to identifying people who've had a rough trot in life, and that leads to the Aboriginal community. And a lot of soldiers we know, and the committee that Bill and I are on, really are passionate about how unfairly Aboriginal soldiers and indeed Aboriginal people have been treated. Bill became very close to a chap called Professor Peter Buckskin, and Peter was involved with Reconciliation South Australia, which is a group, not-for-profit body that's looking to close the gap and to try and provide a bit of balance in our relationship with Aboriginal people. And Bill asked me, would I go on the board? Now, Bill wasn't on the board, but he wanted me to go on. And he knew how passionate I was. And so I went on the board, but as soon as I got on, I said, you should be here too. So Bill came on, as did another friend of ours, well-known Ian Smith. So in the end, we the three of us were there. So we were able to, like the Premier was on the leader of the opposition, who became Premier. Stephen Marshall was on it. So it was reasonably high-powered. That was all good. And we were able to do some good things there. But that led into the creation of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorial, which is hugely celebrated here. It's on the northwestern corner of Torrens Parade Ground. It's probably the best memorial of its type and most impactful memorial of its type in Australia. And I got asked by the Premier I'd been privileged to do the Vietnam War Memorial, and that was successful, done by veterans. And the Premier then, he'd come up with the idea at the time, Jay Weatherall. In fact, he may have been Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation. He came and said, look, we've had this idea of building an Aboriginal one, but it's sort of stalled. And you did that. Would you come and work with a few people on this one? And I said, yeah, love to. And I grabbed and rang Bill up and said, mate, we've got a gig here. And he said, great. I said, so will you come on the board too? And he said, yes, I'll come on the board. So Bill and I then seeded the board. We had the Aboriginal people who we knew and loved and have become firm friends, but we also seeded sympathetic bodies that knew a bit about Aboriginal issues and Aboriginal service. The Aboriginal people on the board thought that was a good idea. It was all with their approval. And Bill came on, and Bill was wonderful. So that led to this memorial being unveiled by the Governor-General in 2006. And then we pushed on to create a flow of what flowed from that was this other committee called Aboriginal Veterans of South Australia, which just looks to identify Aboriginal veterans in South Australia who, in a lot of cases, are in unmarked graves and their families know nothing about them. I guess the logic is the true currency in a currency that is immutable in Australia is the legacy of Anzac. Whether you're black, white or brindle, there's very few people who don't look at Anzac and see something positive, something to be proud of. And the sad thing was that the Aboriginal people had been cut out of this. In 2015, Angus Houston, the former Chief of Defence Force, was commissioned by the government to work out, 2014, how we should commemorate the Anzac centenary in 2015. So they got this consultancy company, Colmar Brunn, who flew around Australia. They were given a few $1 million to consult with everybody. And then they had to present to Angus and Bob Hawke and a variety of other interesting people in Canberra in the cabinet room. So it was pretty high-powered. And I was the South Australian representative. And they said, this is, telling us how Australians wanted to commemorate Anzac, as distinct from veterans. And the story went through, and I thought, I bet they haven't asked the Aboriginal community. So I waited until the end. I thought, I'll cream them with this. So I put my hand up and I said, now, can you tell me, have you consulted with the Aboriginal community? And they said, yes, we have. And I said, oh, good. Yeah. So I sat back down again. I said, what did they tell you? And they said, and these words I've used forever, or since then, the Aboriginal community believe Anzac is a party to which they were never invited, right? And that says a lot. So our job in this committee that with Bill was heavily involved with, he took on the education function that flowed from the creation of the memorial, was to put out the invitations to the party. And we've done a lot of that. So it involved creating travelling exhibitions with displays, records, replica medals of Aboriginal soldiers, which schools can bid for through the History Trust. We did that when I was working in government with Bill and the AFSA committee. Then there are school programs where people go out and speak. And this was all with Bill as the head of the education section of AFSA. Then we got on to grave dedications, finding the grave sites of unmarked of Aboriginal veterans. Perhaps the best example was William Westbury from Pinaroo. William Westbury was just a patch of ground. There was, I think, a very basic headstone, but nothing. No one knew about him in the town. But we found out that he was the only Aboriginal veteran from from South Australia to go to the Boer War, the only one. Then he came back, and then he joined up for World War One, and landed on Gallipoli when he got his toe shot off. Then he came back and did the most marvellous things around Pinaroo. He became an upright citizen and they used to have a Pinaroo marathon every year, and he won it so many years in a row. Run on the 26th, run in January when it was about 120. Don't know why they were doing that. And there were the medals. He was given medals, and there he was, just nothing. No one even knew about him. So we're able to restore his grave, beautiful grave now, and then take all the information about him and put it into the public realm. So that leads on to him, that his grave is a sort of a tourist attraction. But we use Anzac in the hope that white fellas will look at the Aboriginal soldiers and go, oh, they were there too. I didn't know that. And they were fighting, and they were decorated, and they were killed in action, and they were taken prisoner of war. Whoa, that means something. At the same time, the black fellas don't look at the person that died and just draw so much confidence and pride from that, and their families come out and go, Uncle Harry, I just knew him as the old bloke who lived down the street. He was at Tobruk. Oh, wow, and they had a bung arm. He got shot, and all of that stuff. Yeah. So there's a huge, just self-esteem of the Aboriginal community and education of the non-Aboriginal community. And that we've just come back. He talked about Cal, and we've just come back a few weeks ago while Bill was in hospital because he was supposed to be with us. We unveiled a grave in Cal and then a grave in Port Augusta that we've fully restored of Aboriginal soldiers. And we gave lectures to the school kids. And all of that was the powerful force behind all of that was Bill and his passion.
Yeah, mutual respect. Now, Military Advocates SA, the military experience with overseas engagements, etc., always has the fallout consequence of people who are damaged, come back damaged mentally, physically, in some fashion. And that seems to be growing, unfortunately, because it's not just a war, it can be peacekeeping missions, etc., as you know.
And peacetime service too.
Indeed, that's right. The need for this Military Advocates SA clearly is there, and I would regard it as a pretty proud legacy of Bill's military service, an ongoing part of that. How do you see MASA?
Oh, no, absolutely. And I see it more so because it was probably one of the projects of Bill that I didn't get as involved in as I probably could have. Indeed, Bill and I were on a committee together which led to the Veterans Wellbeing Centre, which is which is where MASA operates from mainly. I sort of reached the stage 70, getting them early to mid 70s. I said, Bill, I've got to back off. I've got these grandchildren, and I've got to put a bit of effort in there. So I pulled away from that. We're still on lots of other projects together, but that one in particular. And Bill, I said, I just don't know how great the need's going to be, mate. And he said, I think it'll be significant. Well, time has proven the Bill was spot on the money, and I was well wide of the target. And he moved on with that, starting off at Plimpton and then getting, putting in bids for funding and getting the support of, people like John Gregory and then pushing on and identifying the Southeast as being where, a lot of need was. But Bill, I think that'll be his legacy. Another legacy, if I may, is when way back when I finished up with the government. I was the director of Veterans SA, but I finished up in 2014. The way the government was going in its veterans representation, a lot of the smaller organisations felt left out. It was just the way the government wanted to push. So they were the bigger organisations and the gender balance, that was all being recognised. But if you came to look at career veterans, partners of veterans, the Australian War Widows, Vietnam Veterans Association, there was about 19, as it turned out, very small little organisations that didn't have a lot of members, but certainly had a voice and a view. And I remember in about 2000 and it must have been about 15 or 16, the government asked for the ex-service community to give their view on the rewriting of the Veterans Entitlement Act, I think it was. The Productivity Commission was commissioned to look at that. And they said, every state has to have a view. And we saw the request come down to South Australia, and we saw at the time that we worried whether the government was in a position to actually respond to this request. To be fair, the request from federal government came down 2 weeks before Christmas with an expectation that all submissions would be finished by the first week of the new year, and the Productivity Commission would come to Adelaide and take formal submissions on the 8th of January, like it's, from with your background, you're putting out the garbage, just on a Friday night. It was very much like that. Anyway, Bill grabbed me and he said, look, you've got all these contacts, and he had all this knowledge. He said, why don't we not get the band together, because the band was still together. He said, we should take this on. If the state government can't do it, we'll do it. So I said, fine, Bill's idea. And we pulled together 19 of the presidents and got them all into Plimpton and Glenelg RSL and sat them all down and went through it with them, and had 3 or 4 workshops, and ended up preparing a paper, a very significant paper, met this almost impossible deadline in Canberra, sent it away, had it acknowledged, and as it turned out, the state government body, I'm not criticising anybody, but just happened to be, they were not in a position to be able to do it. They just couldn't even make a submission. So it was and it was all down to Bill. Then we got a letter back from Canberra saying it's the best submission we received, which is not bad when you consider the whole nation. And would you come and present it in person? So Bill and I went to the Grand Chancellor, or one of the places they were staying, into the boardroom, and when that Productivity Commission was considering all of this, which took them about 6 months, this was the first presentation that they'd coordinated, and Bill and I gave the very first one they ever got. And it had a hugely beneficial to the veterans community, and that spun off into more recent, later submissions, because that was several years ago. So, but the good thing is for Bill, what we call the group of organisations we pulled together, we thought, well, including the RSL, we thought, well, what are we going to call them? We struggled for a name, and in the end we called it the Consortium. And the Consortium, it wasn't the best name in the world, but it reflected what we were. And now in South Australia, whenever there's an issue where support is needed, or people are unhappy about a particular matter, the Consortium is pulled together. And it's, even now, even today, it's happening. There's state government, Adelaide City Council has been approached to put the name of Breaker Morant on the memorial, and there's a hugely different views within the community. And only 2 days ago, the Consortium put forward its submission. A year ago, the government gave medals to all those men and women who fought the bushfires about 5 or 6 years ago, community service medals. And because of the profile, you had to work 6 days in a row or 5 days in a row. It suited all the fires in the other states. But over here, we had a day on, day off, day on, day off. And the nature of the prescription of the medal criteria, a lot of South Australians completely missed out, 600. And the state government was asked about that, and they said, well, we're not worried. And so the Consortium took it up. Bill and me and another fellow, Ian Smith, fought the battle, and young lads and men and women ended up, Government House or Honours and Awards Directorate said, okay, you win, yes. 600 young men and women here got a medal that they'll wear forever. Yeah. I know you'd know a bit about the military. As Queen Victoria said, men will give their lives for an inch of silk. They say medals don't matter. but they do an awful lot. So Bill's conviction, his passion, his knowledge, his basic common sense, his hard work has had a huge impact on the entire veterans community.
Okay, great, Bill. What do you think I should ask you that we haven't asked so far? What's the issue in your?
I don't. I think you've pretty well covered it all. I think it's. I just think we took Bill for granted a bit, which was sad. What more could we have done for Bill? Because Bill was so busy doing everything for us. When you think about it, that's sad. We did get him recognised in a superficial way. Got an OAM and got him recognised as Anzac of the Year, and he's applied to have his OAM upgraded to an AM. So he did. I'm bloody glad that happened. It would have been shameful if he'd gone to his grave and hadn't been, didn't know that people cared for him. But in the broader sense, I think we might have done more. But that's life, I suppose.
I think we're grateful to have him around. He did enormously good work in his life, and I just think it was part of his DNA.
It was, and we were lucky, very, very lucky. It was a privilege to know him, and how sad it is that he's gone, but how tragic it is to lose him at 75. How lucky we were to have known him. Really lucky.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Des. Appreciate it.